Welcome back. Now, this is technically the first actual video tutorial relating to sound design within this course. And what better way to start it than with the most simplest way to design sounds with the ADSR. Firstly, before everything, let's quickly run down the 4 basic sound waves which was discussed in the previous chapter of this book. In most synthesizers, you can always expect to see or use the 4 basic sound waves, which is generally the starting point or your so-called blank slate for most digital sound design. These waves are the sine wave, the triangle wave, the square wave, and the saw wave. As mentioned in the book, because of its one pure frequency, sine waves are soft sounding and are usually great for creating stuff like sub-bass or flute-like sounds or some mellow tunes. Square waves are concave and have more harmonics, which makes it sound richer. Square wave also has some sort of similarities to sounds that you usually hear in old video games or chiptune, like the Game Boy. Triangle waves are like a combination of the sine wave and the square wave. It sounds soft, but has more harmonics than a sine. You can say it's like chiptune but softer, or well, an in-between of the sine and the square. Lastly, we have the saw wave. Saw waves are aggressive and has the most harmonics than any of the other waves. The saw is really good for creating those aggressive bass or horns that you typically hear in most songs like feature bass nowadays. Within Vital, by default, you will only have access to the saw wave on its initial preset or init preset. Now, if you have created an account within Vital and have the default preset pack installed, you will have access to the preset called Basic Shapes, which includes the 4 basic sound waves, as well as some extra ones like white noise. Now, with that said, these 4 waves will be used a lot to showcase the process of designing sounds in this course. Feel free to use whichever you want, of course, and experiment with them as we go by. ADSR stands for Attack, Decay, Sustain, and Release, and it is an envelope. But we'll discuss what are envelopes in a later part of this series. Right now, we'll discuss the core mechanics of the ADSR. The ADSR can be found in almost every synth or generator plugin. For example, here on Vital, the ADSR is located here on the right side where all the envelopes are. In any case your plugin does not have an inbuilt one, FL Studio technically gives you one. For example, with this stock FL Studio plugin called 3X Oscillator, clicking the gear icon on the top left of the plugin will drop down a set of options that you can navigate to. And then if you head on over to the second button on the top left, you are now greeted with an envelope with its ADSR. Now, what does the ADSR do? As the name suggests, the ADSR allows you to change and edit the parameters of a sound by changing the attack, the decay, the sustain, the release, along with other parameters such as the hold and the delay. When a sound is played with your keyboard or your MIDI controllers, the sound goes to a series of stages which correlates with the ADSR. Let's run them one by one. The attack is the parameter that affects the starting point of a sound, or rather, the instant when you click your keyboard or controllers to play the sound. If the attack is set low or on by default, the sound plays immediately when you press it. And when it is set higher, it adds some sort of fade-in effect, which makes the sound like a pad or a violin for the most part. Decay allows you to change the sound's cutoff and is dependent on the sustain. You could say that it is the opposite of the attack and will be responsible for adding some sort of fade out effect. The sustain will be your indicator of the sound's lowest level. If the sustain is set high, there will be no sustain and the sound will play on its highest level throughout. If it is set lower, the sound will transition on a lower volume from when it hits the decay towards to its sustain level. And of course, if the sustain is set to 0, the sound stops playing upon reaching its sustain point. Pairing it up with a relatively high decay creates that fade out sound effect that I was talking about earlier. The hold is between the attack and decay. The hold will determine how long or short the sound will be played on its highest level before it starts doing its decay. In other words, the sound will play at its highest level until it reaches its decay. At the same time, if you set the sustain to 0 and have a short hold and set the decay near the middle of the knob, you can create what is known as a pluck type sound. The release is like an after effect. The release will only be heard after the sound has been played or after your fingers have been lifted up from the keyboard or your MIDI controllers. This works best for adding some sort of echo effect after your sound, and it also allows your sound to feel a bit bigger. Lastly, the delay. Now, this is a parameter that is usually not used or ignored for the most part, as its general idea is to simply delay the start of the sound from when you pressed on the note. Now, I would say that it is entirely not useless, as sometimes you may want to delay a start point of a sound especially if you're doing stuff like live performances or a play. Or it could also be useful for creating a sound with some layers on it that has some sort of 1-2 punch type of effect. The ADSR is really great on its own already. Whether you're starting out or a professional already on the sound side, you can always expect to rely on the ADSR. Try it out and see what kind of sound you can make. Mix and match the parameters and you may even be surprised with how many variations you might create.